She stood alone at the back of the economy cabin, her Army service uniform now wrinkled after being escorted away from first class. The Navy officers had made sure everyone saw her humiliation. "Support staff should know their place," one had sneered. The flight attendants apologized quietly, but the damage was done. 200 passengers witnessed her silent walk of shame. 3 hours later, as critical systems began failing over the Atlantic, panic spread through the cabin. But when the pilot's voice crackled urgently over the intercom, he wasn't calling for the smirking officers. He was asking for her. Which city of the world are you watching from today? If this story resonates with you, please consider subscribing to support more content honoring our quiet heroes. The fluorescent lights of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport's Terminal D hummed overhead as Sergeant Deirdre Calloway sat alone in the first-class lounge, her Army service uniform crisp despite the 14 hours of travel already behind her. She absently brushed her thumb across the worn edge of her brother's memorial card before slipping it back into her breast pocket, next to her heart. 15 years in the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment had taught Deirdre the art of blending in. Even in her dress uniform, passengers' eyes seemed to slide past her as if she were made of smoke. She preferred it that way. The less attention, the better, a habit formed during countless nights, maintaining Black Hawks under blackout conditions, while insurgent fire peppered the perimeter. Her tablet displayed complex technical schematics for the latest hydraulic systems modifications to the MH-60M helicopters her unit operated. Most people would see incomprehensible diagrams, but to Deirdre, they were as clear as a children's picture book. She made small annotations in the margins, her mind automatically identifying potential failure points and maintenance shortcuts that could prove fatal in combat conditions. Final boarding call for transatlantic flight 237 to London Heathrow. The announcement cut through her thoughts. Deirdre gathered her weathered carry-on and service cap, her movements efficient and economical. The first-class boarding pass felt foreign in her hand, a rare personal splurge after her brother's funeral. One luxury, after 15 years of military transport and economy seats, seemed reasonable, especially when her joints still ached from the shrapnel she'd taken in Kandahar 3 years ago. As she approached the gate, the atmosphere shifted. A boisterous group of Navy officers in dress blues commandeered the pre-boarding area, their laughter carrying across the terminal. Deirdre instinctively straightened her posture, but kept her eyes forward, focusing on the gate agent rather than the naval officers whose conversation halted as she passed. "First-class boarding for transatlantic flight 237, the gate agent announced, examining Deirdre's boarding pass with a smile. "Thank you for your service, Sergeant." Deirdre nodded her thanks and moved toward the jetway, but a voice cut through the ambient noise of the terminal. "Excuse me," called a deep, authoritative voice. "I believe there's been some mistake." Commander Harlan Pierce stood with his boarding pass extended, his eyes moving from Deirdre's staff sergeant's stripes to her first-class boarding pass with poorly disguised disdain. Behind him, Lieutenant Commander Briscoe shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between his superior and Deirdre. "First-class boarding is for officers and executives," Pierce continued, loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. "Support personnel typically board with general boarding." The gate agent glanced between them, confusion evident on her face. "Sir, the passenger has a valid first-class ticket." Pierce's eyes narrowed on Deirdre's 160th SOAR patch. "Special Operations Aviation Regiment? That's helicopter maintenance, isn't it? Support staff." Deirdre met his gaze but said nothing. Engaging would only create a scene, and scenes meant attention. Attention was the enemy of effectiveness, the first lesson taught to night stalkers. "My boarding pass is valid, sir," she said quietly. "Purchased with my own funds." Pierce raised an eyebrow. "That's not how it works, Sergeant. There's a chain of command even in civilian life." Several passengers had stopped to watch the confrontation, their faces a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Deirdre felt heat rising in her neck, but kept her expression neutral. This wasn't her first encounter with this type of officer. The kind who measured worth by the insignia on one's collar rather than the substance of one's character. "Is there a problem here?" asked Flight Attendant Margot Whitney, approaching with professional concern. Pierce turned his attention to Whitney. "I believe there may be a seating confusion. This sergeant seems to have been assigned to first class." Whitney glanced at Deirdre's boarding pass, then at her uniform. "Your pass is certainly valid, ma'am. But perhaps there's been a security breach," Pierce interrupted. "Those of us with higher clearance levels should be seated together. Operational security concerns." The lie was smooth, delivered with the confidence of someone rarely questioned. Whitney hesitated, clearly intimidated by Pierce's rank and authority. "I'm sure we can sort this out," Whitney said diplomatically. "Sergeant, perhaps you'd be more comfortable." "It's fine," Deirdre said quietly. The weight of her brother's funeral, the long flight ahead, and now this public scrutiny suddenly too heavy to bear. "I'm happy to sit in economy." Pierce smiled thinly. "Sensible. My father was a master chief, and he knew his place." As Whitney led her through first class toward economy, Deirdre felt the eyes of every passenger. The walk seemed endless, her service cap tucked under her arm, her dignity wrapped around her like armor. Behind her, she could hear Pierce loudly discussing NATO exercises with his colleagues, their laughter following her down the aisle. "I'm so sorry about this," Whitney whispered as they reached economy. "I can offer you a premium economy seat with extra legroom." "Standard economy is fine," Deirdre replied. Her brother would have made a scene, would have stood his ground, but Aiden was gone now, and Deirdre had always been the quiet one, the fixer, not the fighter. She settled into seat 34B, next to a young Army private who straightened when he noticed her sore patch. His eyes widened slightly. "You're with the Night Stalkers, ma'am?" he asked quietly. Deirdre gave a slight nod, but placed her finger to her lips in the universal sign for silence. The private understood immediately, offering a respectful nod before returning to his book. Through the window, dark storm clouds gathered on the horizon as the aircraft taxied toward the runway. Deirdre closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing as the plane accelerated down the runway and lifted into the turbulent sky, carrying her further from her brother's grave and toward whatever lay ahead. The seatbelt sign remained illuminated as Flight 237 climbed through layers of thick cloud. Deirdre didn't mind. She had slept in far more uncomfortable positions during her deployments. Leaning back, she allowed herself to drift, the white noise of the aircraft engines providing a familiar comfort. A sudden jolt snapped her back to alertness. The aircraft lurched, stabilized, then lurched again more violently. Overhead, the seatbelt sign flashed with renewed urgency as the cabin lights dimmed momentarily. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking," came a controlled voice over the intercom. "We're experiencing some unexpected turbulence as we climb to our cruising altitude. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Flight attendants, please suspend service and secure the cabin." Most passengers reacted with mild concern, but Deirdre's trained ear caught something others missed. A subtle change in the pitch of the port engine. Almost imperceptible, but there. She straightened in her seat, senses now fully alert. The young private glanced at her. "Just turbulence, right?" Before she could answer, the aircraft banked sharply to the right, then shuddered, as if struck by an invisible hand. This wasn't just weather. Something was wrong with the aircraft. "This is Captain Langston Everett," the intercom crackled again. "We're experiencing some minor system anomalies and will be leveling off at 28,000 feet rather than continuing our climb. We expect to resume normal flight operations shortly. Cabin crew, please check in." Deirdre watched as Flight Attendant Whitney moved quickly through the cabin, her professional smile now strained. When Whitney passed Deirdre's row, their eyes met briefly. Whitney paused, recognition flickering across her face. "Everything's fine," Whitney assured, but her voice lacked conviction. Deirdre leaned forward. "The port engine pitch has changed. There's a hydraulic issue, isn't there?" Whitney's composure slipped for just a moment. "How did you—" "I maintain Black Hawks," Deirdre said simply. I know how aircraft sound when they're in distress. Another violent shudder ran through the plane. The lights flickered. Several passengers gasped. I need to get back to my station, Whitney said, moving quickly toward the front of the aircraft. The plane leveled off, but Deirdre could sense the struggle in its movements. The vibrations through the floor had changed frequency. Through her window, she could see the port engine nacelle, noting with concern a slight asymmetry in its position relative to the wing. In the cockpit, Captain Everett and First Officer Abernathy worked methodically through emergency checklists. Warning lights flashed across the instrument panel. Hydraulic pressure dropping in System A, Abernathy reported. System B compensating. But readings are inconsistent. Flight computer is throwing contradictory alerts. Captain Everett, drawing on 20 years of flying experience, felt something was fundamentally wrong. This isn't in the manual. Multiple unrelated systems shouldn't fail simultaneously like this. The aircraft lurched again, more violently this time. In the cabin, oxygen masks dropped from overhead compartments, triggering panic among the passengers. Margot, Everett called over the intercom to his senior flight attendant. I need those Navy officers in the cockpit immediately. See if any of them have aviation experience. Whitney rushed to first class, returning moments later with Commander Pierce and Lieutenant Commander Briscoe. Both men entered the cockpit with confident strides that faltered when they saw the chaos of warning lights across the instrument panel. Gentlemen, Everett said without preamble, we're experiencing multiple cascading failures. Our diagnostic systems can't isolate the cause. Any aviation experience between you? Pierce scanned the instruments, his earlier arrogance diminishing with each flashing warning light. We're surface warfare officers, Captain. Naval vessels, not aircraft. Damn, Everett muttered, as another system alarm joined the cacophony. We've lost 50% of our hydraulic pressure. At this rate, we'll lose flight control surfaces within 20 minutes. The young private beside Deirdre noticed her focused attention on the engine sounds. Sergeant, you know something, don't you? Deirdre nodded once, her mind rapidly cataloging the symptoms. This wasn't just a routine mechanical failure, it was a cascade, one system dragging down others in a deadly chain reaction. The pattern was familiar, too familiar. I need to speak with the captain, she said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that made the private straighten involuntarily. I'll get a flight attendant, he offered, but Deirdre was already on her feet. Moving against the aircraft's increasingly erratic movements, Deirdre made her way forward. She passed frightened passengers clutching their oxygen masks, children crying, flight attendants struggling to maintain order. When she reached the divider between economy and first class, a male flight attendant tried to block her path. Ma'am, you need to return to your seat immediately. I need to speak with the captain, Deirdre replied. I know what's happening to this aircraft. The firm certainty in her voice gave him pause. Whitney appeared behind him, recognition dawning in her eyes. You're the sergeant from earlier, Whitney said. The one who works on helicopters. Deirdre nodded. What you're experiencing is a sensor feedback loop creating a false hydraulic pressure reading. The flight computer is compensating for a problem that doesn't exist, and in doing so, it's creating a real catastrophic failure. Whitney's eyes widened. How could you possibly know that? Because I've seen it before, Deirdre said simply. In modified military aircraft, using similar avionics systems. I need to speak with the captain, now. As they moved swiftly toward the cockpit, they passed through first class, where Commander Pierce was returning to his seat, face ashen. Where do you think you're going, Sergeant? He demanded, reflexively reasserting authority despite the circumstances. Deirdre didn't slow her pace. To the cockpit, sir? Unless you'd prefer to swim home. She continued forward, leaving Pierce staring after her, the reality of their situation finally penetrating his pride. For the first time since their encounter at the gate, he saw not a subordinate rank, but a woman who moved with absolute purpose amidst chaos. The cockpit door opened to reveal a scene of controlled chaos. Warning lights bathed the space in an ominous red glow. Captain Everett and First Officer Abernathy worked in synchronized urgency, their movements increasingly desperate as system after system reported failures. "Captain," Whitney said, "this is Sergeant Calloway from the Army. She says she knows what's happening to the aircraft." Everett barely glanced up. "I don't have time for—" Master Sergeant Deirdre Calloway, 106th SOAR, Aircraft Maintenance Lead. Deirdre interrupted, her quiet voice carrying an unmistakable authority that cut through the chaos. 15 years, 4 combat deployments. I need 30 seconds of your time, or we have approximately 18 minutes before catastrophic hydraulic failure. Something in her tone made Everett pause. He turned, taking in her uniform, her steady gaze, the quiet confidence that radiated from her despite the emergency unfolding around them. "Talk to me, Sergeant," he said. The cockpit's red warning lights cast an apocalyptic glow over the instruments as Deirdre quickly scanned the bewildering array of alerts. Where others saw chaos, she recognized a pattern one she'd encountered during a classified operation 3 years earlier. "Your primary hydraulic system isn't actually failing," she said, her voice calm amidst the cacophony of alarms. "It's getting false readings from a crossed sensor array." Captain Everett's skepticism was evident but tempered by desperation. "That's not possible. These systems are isolated specifically to prevent cross-contamination. On standard commercial aircraft, yes," Deirdre agreed, moving closer to examine the maintenance readouts. "When was your last avionics update?" 3 weeks ago, First Officer Abernathy supplied. "Full system integration with the new flight management computer." Deirdre nodded. "The contractor was Meridian Aerospace, wasn't it?" Everett's eyes widened slightly. "How did you know that?" "Because they've adapted military technology for civilian use," she explained, fingers flying over the diagnostic screen. "I've seen this exact signature in modified Black Hawks. The new flight management system is misinterpreting sensor data and creating a feedback loop that's actually draining your hydraulic pressure." She pointed to contradictory readings on different instruments. "See, your analog gauges show normal pressure, but your digital systems are reporting critical failure. The computer is trying to compensate for a problem that doesn't exist, and in doing so, it's creating a real one." Commander Pierce appeared in the cockpit doorway, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine concern. "Captain, is there anything we can—" He fell silent as he saw Deirdre methodically working through the aircraft systems with the confidence of someone who had faced this demon before and defeated it. "We need to bypass the flight computer's diagnosis protocols," Deirdre continued. "It's trying to fix something that isn't broken, and it's killing us in the process." Captain Everett shook his head. "That's not in any commercial aircraft procedure I know." "No, sir. It wouldn't be," Deirdre replied. "This is a modification some military contractors adapted from SOAR field repairs. I recognize the signature because I helped develop the fix when we encountered it in Afghanistan." A decision crystallized in Everett's eyes, the recognition of one professional by another. "Tell me what to do, Sergeant." With practiced precision, Deirdre guided them through a complex series of system overrides. Her hands moved with surgical accuracy across controls that should have been foreign to her but somehow weren't. "We need to manually reset the sensor calibration while simultaneously isolating the feedback loop," she explained. "It's like performing a field amputation to save the patient. We're going to lose some functionality, but we'll stop the bleeding." As they worked, the violent shuddering of the aircraft gradually subsided. Engine 1 stabilized, though Engine 2 remained offline. "We've stopped the cascade," Deirdre confirmed, checking the pressure readings. "But we're still operating on reduced hydraulic capacity. We need to divert to the nearest suitable airfield." "Keflavik is 340 miles northeast," Abernathy reported. "It's an airbase with full emergency capabilities." Everett nodded. "Can we make it, Sergeant?" Deirdre studied the systems thoughtfully. "Not without additional intervention. The hydraulic pressure will continue to degrade even with the feedback loop broken." She turned to Commander Pierce, who still stood in the doorway. "Sir, I need your officers." Pierce straightened, surprised but ready. "Whatever you need, Sergeant." We need to prepare the cabin for an emergency landing, and I need a team to help monitor hydraulic pressure manually. If it drops below 1,500 psi, we lose flight controls." Pierce nodded, a new respect evident in his eyes. "You'll have it, Sergeant." As Pierce left to organize his officers, Deirdre turned back to the cockpit controls. "Captain, we need to implement one more field modification. It's unorthodox, but it should get us to Keflavik." "More unorthodox than what we've already done?" Everett asked with a grim smile. "We developed this technique for damaged helicopters in Kandahar," Deirdre explained. "We're going to create a manual pressure bridge between the auxiliary and primary hydraulic systems. It won't be pretty, but it should keep us flying long enough to reach Iceland." For the next 40 minutes, as the crippled aircraft limped toward Iceland, Deirdre orchestrated a symphony of improvisations. Commander Pierce and his officers, now taking orders from the sergeant they had humiliated hours earlier, monitored pressure gauges throughout the cabin. Lieutenant Commander Briscoe coordinated with flight attendants to prepare passengers for a rough landing. Throughout the cabin, passengers clung to their armrests, praying silently as the aircraft shuddered and groaned. The young Army private, who had sat beside Deirdre, moved through the economy section, quietly reassuring civilians with a confidence borrowed from his brief encounter with the sergeant. "There's a Night Stalker mechanic helping the pilots," he told a frightened family. "If anyone can get us down safely, it's her." In the cockpit, Captain Everett maintained constant communication with Keflavik Air Base as they prepared for the emergency landing. "Keflavik Tower, this is Transatlantic 237, he radioed, declaring emergency, multiple system failures, requesting immediate emergency landing clearance and full response team. Transatlantic 237, Keflavik Tower, you are cleared for immediate approach runway 2. Emergency teams standing by. What is the nature of your failures?" Everett glanced at Deirdre, who was still fine-tuning the makeshift hydraulic bridge. "Tower, we have a cascading system failure affecting hydraulics and engine performance. We're running on manual overrides and field modifications." There was a brief pause from the tower. "Field modifications? Please clarify." "We have military aviation maintenance personnel aboard, implementing emergency procedures," Everett replied. "Request foam on runway. Our landing gear indicators are uncertain and will be coming in hot." "Understood." Transatlantic 237. Foam trucks deploying. All emergency services standing by. As they began their final approach, Deirdre quietly excused herself from the cockpit. "Where are you going?" Everett asked, surprised. "We're not down yet." "You've got this, Captain," she replied, with the ghost of a smile. "I'm just the mechanic. The landing is your expertise." Before he could protest, she was gone, making her way back to her economy seat just as the announcement came for final landing preparation. The young private looked at her with newfound awe as she buckled herself in beside him. "You fixed it," he whispered. Deirdre shook her head slightly. "Not fixed. Patched. Sometimes that's all you can do." The landing was rough, a controlled crash that sent luggage tumbling and passengers screaming, but the wheels held, and the aircraft came to a shuddering stop on the Keflavik runway. Emergency vehicles surrounded them immediately, their lights painting the cabin in alternating red and blue. As passengers were evacuated to a hangar for processing, Deirdre blended into the crowd, seeking anonymity once again. But anonymity, it seemed, was no longer her fate. Commander Pierce searched through the gathered passengers until he found her sitting alone on a bench, her service cap in her hands. He approached and stood at attention. "Sergeant Calloway." Deirdre looked up, her expression neutral. "I owe you an apology," Pierce said formally. "A public one." Before she could respond, he turned to address the gathered passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to acknowledge something important. We are all alive right now because of this woman's expertise and courage." A hush fell over the crowd as Pierce continued. "Earlier today, I judged Sergeant Calloway based on her rank. I assumed that because she wasn't an officer, she didn't belong in first class. I was wrong, dead wrong. And that prejudice nearly cost us all our lives. He turned back to Deirdre, removing his gold commander insignia from his collar. My father taught me that rank is nothing without character. Today you showed more of both than I did. He placed the insignia in her palm, closing her fingers over it. Thank you, Sergeant. Not just for saving our lives, but for teaching some of us a lesson we desperately needed to learn. A spontaneous applause broke out among the passengers. People who had witnessed her humiliation now looked at her with undisguised admiration. The officers who had laughed at Pierce's comments now stood straight, their faces solemn with respect. Captain Everett approached, accompanied by several airline executives. Sergeant Calloway, these gentlemen would like a word. Miss Calloway, began one executive, the airline would like to offer you a position as a safety consultant. We need people who see what the manuals miss. As murmurs of approval spread through the crowd, a young girl approached with a hand-drawn card. Thank you for saving my mom and dad, she said shyly, pressing the card into Deirdre's hands. The young Army private stepped forward. Ma'am, my unit has been in contact with headquarters. The Night Stalkers sent a message they're flying in to escort you home, personally. For the first time since receiving news of her brother's death 2 weeks earlier, Deirdre Calloway smiled fully. Not because she sought recognition, but because in this moment of crisis, she had honored her brother's memory by being exactly who she was, the quiet professional who made the difference when it mattered most. Outside the hangar doors, a Black Hawk helicopter with the distinctive 160 SOR insignia touched down, its crew emerging to render silent salutes as Deirdre approached. The passengers of Flight 237 gathered at the hangar windows, watching as the sergeant they had once overlooked walked toward the helicopter, her bearing straight and proud. Commander Pierce and his officers formed an impromptu honor guard, saluting as she passed. Captain Everett stepped forward, offering his hand. In 25 years of flying, I've never seen anyone read an aircraft like you did today. You have a standing invitation in my cockpit, Sergeant Calloway. Deirdre shook his hand firmly. Thank you, Captain. But I belong with my unit. There are other birds that need fixing. As she approached the waiting helicopter, the crew chief grinned. Heard you had some excitement, Sergeant. Just another day at the office, Chief, she replied, climbing aboard with practiced ease. The Black Hawk lifted off, banking gracefully as it headed out over the North Atlantic. Inside the hangar, the passengers and crew of Flight 237 continued to watch until the helicopter disappeared into the distance, carrying away the quiet warrior who had saved them all without ever raising her voice. Lieutenant Commander Briscoe stood beside Commander Pierce, both men still watching the empty sky. You know, sir, Briscoe said quietly, my father always told me to judge people by what they do, not by the insignia they wear. Pierce nodded, his expression thoughtful. Your father was a wise man, Briscoe. Wiser than mine, it seems. He turned to face the younger officer. When we get to London, I'm recommending Sergeant Calloway for a commendation. And then I'm going to spend some time reconsidering what leadership actually means. In the helicopter speeding toward the horizon, Deirdre Calloway looked out at the vast ocean below, thinking of her brother and the legacy he had left behind. He had always been the one to stand up, to make noise when things weren't right. She had always been the one to fix things quietly, to solve problems from the shadows. Today, for the first time, she understood that both approaches had their place, that sometimes the quiet fixers needed to step into the light, if only to remind the world that heroism came in many forms, wearing many different ranks. The helicopter banked toward the rising sun, carrying her home to the unit where she belonged, where quiet competence was the highest virtue, and where she would continue to serve without fanfare, fixing the birds that carried warriors into battle, her name known only to those who understood that sometimes the most crucial battles were won not by those who shouted the loudest, but by those who simply knew what to do when everything was falling apart. 3 weeks after the emergency landing in Iceland, Sergeant Deirdre Calloway sat in her workshop at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, rebuilding a transmission assembly for a Black Hawk helicopter. Her hands moved with practiced precision, each component finding its place with satisfying clicks and smooth rotations. This was her meditation, the world reduced to metal, hydraulics, and the physics of flight. The door to the maintenance bay swung open, admitting her commanding officer, Major Ellis. "Sergeant Calloway," he called, approaching with an official-looking envelope. "Mail call." Deirdre wiped her hands on a shop rag before accepting the envelope. The Department of the Navy seal in the corner made her pause. "Looks important," Major Ellis commented. "Something to do with that airliner incident?" Deirdre nodded. The incident had been contained in official channels, but word had spread throughout the military community. Her maintenance crew had taken to calling her Guardian Angel behind her back, a nickname she steadfastly ignored. "Mind if I open it now, sir?" she asked. "Go ahead. I'm curious myself." She broke the seal and unfolded a formal letter of commendation signed by the Secretary of the Navy. Attached was a personal note from Commander Harlan Pierce. "Sergeant Calloway," it read, "your actions aboard Flight 237 saved 200 lives, including my own. More importantly, you taught me a lesson about prejudice and preconception that has fundamentally changed my approach to leadership. My father was wrong. Rank is not what defines a warrior's worth. I wanted you to know that I've instituted a new training program for all officers under my command, using our encounter as a case study in humility and recognition of expertise, regardless of rank or background. With deepest respect and gratitude, Commander Harlan Pierce." Major Ellis whistled softly. "High praise from the Navy. That's rare enough to frame." Deirdre refolded the letter carefully. "Just did my job, sir. That's why they're recognizing you, Calloway. Because you never asked for it." He handed her another envelope. "This one's from Transatlantic Airlines. Probably a lifetime of free flights." She opened the second envelope to find a job offer, Director of Maintenance Safety Protocols, with a salary that made her eyebrows rise. "Tempted?" Major Ellis asked, noting her expression. Deirdre considered the question seriously. "The money's good," she admitted, "but I belong here. These birds, this unit, it's home." Major Ellis nodded, understanding. "Well, you've got options now, Sergeant. That's never a bad thing." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "By the way, there's a young private waiting outside. Says he was on that flight with you. Asked permission to speak with you." Deirdre looked up, surprised. "Send him in." Moments later, the young Army private from Flight 237 entered the maintenance bay, his uniform pressed, his posture rigid with nervousness. "Private Holloway reporting, Sergeant," he said. Saluting, Deirdre returned the salute. "At ease, Private. What brings you to Campbell?" "I've been reassigned, ma'am. Infantry to aviation maintenance. I requested the transfer after what happened on the flight." He shifted his weight, gathering courage. "What you did, how you handled everything, it changed what I want to do with my career. I want to learn what you know." Deirdre studied him, remembering his quiet support during the crisis. "Aviation maintenance isn't glamorous, Private. No medals, no glory. Just long hours with grease under your fingernails, fixing other people's rides." "Yes, Sergeant. That's what I want." She gestured to the transmission assembly on her workbench. "Know what this is?" "No, Sergeant. It's the main transmission for an MH-60M Blackhawk, the Night Stalker's workhorse. When this fails at 20 feet in hostile territory, it's game over for everyone on board." She picked up a small component. "This seal looks insignificant, doesn't it? But if it fails, the entire transmission seizes. Every component matters, Private. Every detail. That's the first lesson." Private Holloway nodded, eyes fixed on the seemingly insignificant seal. "If you're serious about this path," Deirdre continued, "it means accepting that most people will never know what you do or how important it is. Can you live with that? After seeing what happened on that flight?" "Yes, Sergeant, I believe I can." Deirdre handed him a shop rag. "Then you might as well make yourself useful. Those tools need cleaning." As Private Holloway set to work, Deirdre returned to the transmission assembly, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Perhaps this was her brother's legacy, not just fixing things herself, but teaching others to do the same. The maintenance bay doors opened again, this time admitting Captain Everett, still in his Transatlantic Airlines uniform. He paused just inside, allowing his eyes to adjust to the industrial lighting. "Captain," Deirdre acknowledged, setting down her tools. "This is unexpected." Everett approached, surveying the workshop with appreciative eyes. "Impressive operation, Sergeant. I see where you learned your craft. What brings an airline captain to Fort Campbell?" "Two things," Everett replied. "First, to deliver this in person." He handed her a small box. Inside lay a set of captain's wings, mounted on a plaque with a simple inscription. "To Sergeant Deirdre Calloway, Honorary Captain of Transatlantic Flight 237, for extraordinary service, above and beyond." "The second reason," Everett continued, "is to personally thank you. The investigation confirmed everything you identified. A sensor array conflict in the new avionics system was creating false readings. The entire fleet has been modified with the solution you implemented. You didn't just save our flight, Sergeant. You potentially saved many others." Deirdre accepted the plaque with a nod of thanks. "I'm glad the issue was resolved." "There's more," Everett said. "The airline is establishing a new position, military liaison for aviation safety. The job would involve consulting on maintenance protocols, bridging the gap between military innovations and civilian applications. Part-time, flexible hours. You could maintain your military career while helping us implement what you know." Private Holloway, still cleaning tools nearby, tried not to look like he was listening. "I appreciate the offer, Captain," Deirdre said, "but I've got commitments here. The position doesn't start for 6 months. Everett pressed. "Think about it. Your knowledge shouldn't be limited to military applications when it could benefit civilian aviation worldwide." Major Ellis, who had returned silently during the conversation, cleared his throat. "The Army might be amenable to a special assignment arrangement, Sergeant. Cross-pollination of expertise, especially with safety implications, something to consider." Deirdre looked between them, unused to being the center of such attention. Throughout her career, she had operated in the background, fixing problems without recognition or fanfare. Now, suddenly, people were seeing her, really seeing her, and valuing what she brought to the table. "I'll consider it," she finally conceded. After Captain Everett departed, Deirdre returned to her transmission work, losing herself once again in the familiar routine of maintenance. Private Holloway continued his assigned task, occasionally stealing glances at the sergeant who had become something of a legend. "Sergeant," he ventured after a long silence, "may I ask a personal question?" Deirdre looked up, eyebrow raised. "On the flight, when those officers humiliated you, you didn't say anything. You just took it. But later, when it mattered, you took charge without hesitation. How do you balance that?" She considered the question carefully, testing various responses in her mind before settling on the truth. "My brother Aiden always fought back," she said quietly. "Never let anyone disrespect him, even when it cost him. He'd have made a scene right there at the gate, demanded respect. That was his way." She adjusted a component with meticulous care. "My way is different. I choose my battles based on what matters, not what hurts my pride. Those officers' opinions of me? Irrelevant. 200 people potentially dying because no one spoke up? That matters." She tightened a bolt with precision. "There's a difference between having self-respect and needing others to see it. I know my worth. That's enough." Private Holloway nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson. "Thank you, Sergeant." The following morning, Deirdre arrived at the base to find an unexpected gathering in the maintenance hangar. Her entire unit stood at attention, along with officers she recognized from division headquarters. Major Ellis stepped forward, Sergeant Calloway, front and center. Confused but compliant, Deirdre took her place before the assembled soldiers. "Sergeant Deirdre Calloway," Major Ellis began formally, "it is my honor to inform you that in recognition of your actions aboard Transatlantic Flight 237, demonstrating exceptional technical expertise under extreme pressure and saving 200 civilian lives, you are hereby awarded the Soldier's Medal for heroism not involving actual conflict with an enemy. A senior officer stepped forward, opening a presentation case to reveal the distinguished medal, a bronze octagon suspended from a red, white, and blue ribbon. Additionally, Major Ellis continued, I am authorized to inform you of your promotion to Master Sergeant, effective immediately. Stunned, Deirdre stood rigidly as the medal was pinned to her uniform and her sergeant insignia was replaced with the new rank. The hangar erupted in applause, her maintenance crew cheering the loudest. As the formal ceremony concluded, Deirdre found herself surrounded by well-wishers. Through the crowd, she spotted a familiar face, the young girl from the flight who had given her the hand-drawn thank you card, now accompanied by her parents. Master Sergeant Calloway, the girl's father said, extending his hand. We requested permission to attend today. My daughter has been telling everyone about the army mechanic who saved her life. The young girl stepped forward, handing Deirdre a carefully wrapped package. I made this for you. Inside was a framed drawing, a crude but recognizable rendering of Deirdre, in her uniform, standing tall beside an aircraft. Above the drawing, in a child's careful lettering, were the words, Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes, they wear sergeant stripes. That evening, as Deirdre placed the drawing on her living room wall, alongside her brother's photograph, her phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number. Master Sergeant Calloway, she answered. Master Sergeant? Congratulations on the promotion. It was Commander Pierce. I just received word of the ceremony. Well deserved. Thank you, sir. I'm calling because there's something you should know, Pierce continued. The Naval Aviation Safety Center has requested your input on a new cross-branch safety initiative. They're particularly interested in your field modification techniques under adverse conditions. Deirdre sat down, processing this development. That's traditionally officer territory, sir. It was, Pierce agreed, until I showed them the maintenance log from Flight 237. Your expertise transcends rank, Sergeant. The military is finally ready to recognize that. After the call ended, Deirdre sat quietly in her living room, surrounded by the tangible symbols of her changed status. The medal, the promotion, the drawing, the job offers. For 15 years, she had worked in the shadows, content to let others take credit while she focused on the work itself. Now, suddenly, she had been thrust into the light. Her brother's photo seemed to watch her from across the room. Aiden had always pushed her to stand up, to be seen, to demand the recognition she deserved. You're too quiet, Dee, he'd say. The world doesn't reward the quiet ones. Perhaps he had been wrong about that. Perhaps true recognition came not from demanding it, but from being so good at what you do that eventually the world has no choice but to see you. The next morning, Deirdre arrived at the maintenance hangar before dawn, as was her custom. Private Holloway was already there, diligently studying the maintenance manual for the main rotor assembly. Morning, Private, she greeted. Good morning, Master Sergeant. He stood quickly. Congratulations on the promotion. Thank you. She surveyed the partially disassembled helicopter before them. Ready for your first real lesson? His face lit up. Yes, Master Sergeant. Deirdre picked up a wrench, feeling its familiar weight in her hand. Then let's begin. Every helicopter tells a story if you know how to listen. Today, you learn the language. As the sun rose over Fort Campbell, Master Sergeant Deirdre Calloway began passing on the knowledge that had saved 200 lives over the Atlantic. Not with grand speeches or declarations, but in the same way she did everything that mattered quietly, precisely, and with absolute dedication to getting it right.